Welcome back to the Futurist New Deal podcast. This is Johan Ben Zion, and I'm here with Isaac Arthur. Very excited today to talk about metaverse concepts, a near and far future. Thank you, Isaac, for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Ben, for having me on. Yeah, and I mean, it's very handy in certain respects, but there are other nootropics one can use. And of course, there are tons that are, again, clinical testing on this stuff is hard in the first place because even if you have a good sample and you could rely on them to take it, we're not all that good at actually measuring intelligence in a very useful way. And then it starts getting reputations where this or that thing is the new miracle drug. I was like, well, it might help a little. The study said that they could not find significant results, which doesn't mean there weren't any, but it's a good sign that maybe either that's not that much or we're not using a very big sample. Take your pick.
This concept came up when we were talking about Neuralace. And I said, Neuralace is basically something that in practice could be viewed as a IQ doubler, 100-point IQ booster. Yeah. But then have to always add the caveat. But yeah, the concept of IQ is bullshit. So use your own metric.
There's some. I mean, it's not like it's complete. It's a decent enough baseline for folks to use. It's just to tell people on this is don't ever tell me what your IQ is. I'll never tell you what my IQ is because it's going to be pretty obvious which deviation you're in after talking for about 5 or 6 minutes. And, at most, you're going to fool your way up to looking one better or have an off day and look one worse. And that's about as accurate as you can get anyway. And once you get above like 130, you're in the second or third deviation, it's almost meaningless because all it says is you're much, much smaller than most people. So if you focus on something, you're going to do well.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of, I'm trying to remember. Oh, yeah, it was Feynman who was tested he took an IQ test at a young age and it was one that was very heavy on apparently very heavy on a certain kind of verbal skills which he hadn't cultivated at that time. And he got a relatively low score, like 125. Richard Feynman. Yeah. Well, yeah, but not reflecting his contribution to physics.
I generally feel like anything over 160, it would say if someone gives you a score above 160, it's not true because if they are that smart, they know all the problems with being that precise. And when I have a 165. The margin of error on that's really quite significant. You would note that if you were that smart. So.
That's
things like this person's got the highest IQ in the world. It's a 185. It's like I don't think you understand standard deviations because you can have an IQ over 200. It's not like that scale ends there automatically. 7 billion people. You've got deviations out that far. But then how would you even get a sample to compare those folks? It's like you start. It's like, well, there are theoretically 50 people in this bracket on the planet by definition. How will we possibly actually measure which one is slightly smaller than the other at this point? It's only 50 people. That's not a big enough sample, And of course, there's all those other aspects of intelligence, which is still really, you got the crystalline models or things like that. There's so much on it, and say, how do we enhance that? And then you got the other problems. You got that speed superintelligence that, one of my favorites because it's the one you can probably most easily do. And I say, well, I've quintupled the speed at which you think. Not smarter, just you think faster. And now you're going insane because it seems like everything takes forever to happen. Or any of those little things. I sometimes suspect the abstract concept thinking, what we have that the animals don't, might be a kind of form of insanity. or a very close tip where just a little nudge this way or another will drive you into psychosis. And I feel there's at least some evidence to support that.
Yeah, I don't know if there's probably a few diminishing rate of return effects there, and one of them being that it gets into other kinds of Faustian bargain notions for life extensionists or transhumanists. Is there a point at which we are dealing with too much knowledge, opening too many Pandora's boxes, and so forth?
I generally don't accept that because it's more that I feel like you'd start getting close there, except for when they're existential things. If it's something, I believe in free will by proclamation. I refuse to consider the alternatives because I don't see a point to them. There's no benefit to me from that, but there's no proof to back that up, of course. It's just one of those that says you can't prove or disprove that one per se, and there's no advantage to disproving it, But if you were smart enough that you couldn't lie to yourself and believe that you had free will when the evidence indicated otherwise, if that were the case, it might make you go insane pretty quick. I think, what was it,
Mm.
Ronald Vinge was
I think
he talked about the idea that most of the technological singularities live for 8 seconds or something like that, or 10 minutes. Not necessarily because they all committing suicide, but they ran and shut off.
mm. I think that a lot of belief in a lot of metaphysical business and fatalistic type thinking does contribute to people's um, ill health and poor. I think it kind of it's a hidden cost to society at large that we have so much of this, and
I
I don't
wonder
know.
that though, because I've noticed two types of folks do a lot of existential thinking, and I do a lot of it. And my mental health seems fine. I'm optimistic and cheerful, and I know a lot of folks are like that too. And I don't think we've actually come across anything particularly profound that wasn't available to anybody else reading these books. I think so. It's kind of like one of those things where you are doing the existential stuff either because you are very depressed in life and you're looking for some solutions and answers, in which case you're not going to find them that way, and they're all going to make things worse because you feel like you now have evidence to back up that reasoning, or that's not your motivation in the first place. So you read this and say, that's interesting for a philosophical concept. Time to go grocery shop. It doesn't interfere with your day-to-day life that much. So I'm not sure if they, I mean, maybe they do for a lot of folks cause that, that kind of weird stress thing that we have going on these days, even though life is so much better. But at the same time, I think for a lot of folks, it's just they gravitate that way because they're already in that mode.
Mm. So, do you think there's any truth to the notion that if humanity hadn't spent so much time on, let's just keep it to religious matters, the counting the number of angels that can dance on the head of a pin, theological matters. If we hadn't spent so much time on this, we might already have this space elevator that we want. I already have a condo on the moon.
No, I think we have spent all the time thinking about those things. We never actually gotten around to doing this other stuff. It's in that abstract thinking, about concepts like that. What is being represented by angels dancing on the head of a pin? How many point-like objects can you fit on a point? Kind of, that's basically this thing which does not require a specific amount of space or time. And of course, we come up with some really weird answers to that when we did the empirical study. The danger there is not what you're thinking about. It's what methods you're going to exploit. And this actually hit the Greeks and quite a few other people pretty badly. They got into the complete hard logic thing. You need empirical evidence. You have to have that empirical evidence. So when we start going down there, you don't expect a paradox when you're thinking logically. It shouldn't happen. You're not going to get wave-particle duality by simply, thinking about it. You'll say, no, that can't be right. That's absurd. Move on, right? When you get the evidence in front of you, it says, no, that is absolutely what we've got going on there. It is particle and wave at the same time, and that's a paradox. Now you can go try to figure out why that's a paradox or why it really isn't a paradox. But you're never going to come across that by pure logic. And a lot of the technology that we developed, same way. These folks, they took the aesthetic mindset of retreating off from the world, whereas a lot of the scientific development in the early Enlightenment came from those same folks, instead getting their hands dirty and saying, I wonder how we can plant these fields better. I wonder how we make the better plow. How do we do a better farm rotation? And I always get nervous when I see any type of field of scholarship starting to shift away from that kind of practical application. Not just because, it's good to have folks doing the theory stuff, but they're going to do that anyway. It's when they start getting withdrawn from the empirical world, they start making mistakes. And I think it's not just that they're not producing anything technically useful, it's that they're also not double checking stuff. The logic is there, and they're not seeing the whole in the logic as compared to the real universe.
It's interesting to me because I know quite a few scientists, young people in academia, who are pretty resistant to the idea of citizen science and related notions. And I feel
they need to retire. They are not. Yeah, I get the idea. You can have a lot of damage getting to your data that way. It's been very helpful for some fields. NASA's found it incredibly useful. Tabby Star was found that way. But it's more the mindset. You don't take an apprentice on in a field just because you want help. Because a lot of times initially they don't help at all. You're doing it so that you can make another one of you. Later on they're handy, but that's kind of part of it. And you grow from that experience too. the citizen scientist thing, that is the best way to start inspiring more people, them or their kids or whoever, to become scientists full time. It
Mm-hmm.
also is handy for getting people involved in the stuff they're paying for,
Mm.
because many of
Yeah,
these projects use up a lot of public funds,
yeah, yeah.
and those tend to dissipate on us when the public doesn't feel like it's a good expenditure or they're not interested anymore.
Mm. And I think the SETI app is a pretty good example of a lot of people coming together in that way. And I think we can always hope to see more and more
Mhm.
force multipliers in across disciplines, not only in space study.
Almost every field has, I mean, most of them already use it. History and archaeology routinely rely on amateurs, finding
Mm,
stuff, reporting it. Um, Many of the fields of science have a problem with that only because you need these really big labs. It's hard to do theoretical physics as an amateur. It's hard to do nuclear physics as an amateur. Um, you can help with the data to some degree. You can take an interest in it, but there are limits to what you can do, and that's going to be true for any field. Some of these you really have to devote yourself to it, and you don't have to necessarily be a professional in it. You could be a very enthusiastic amateur. But how about that fellow who discovered, was it like 50 or 60 supernovas back when we had seen barely as many? I can't remember. He was a pastor down in Australia. Can't remember the guy's name. Guy
mm,
would just go out on his backyard telescope and scope them all out. He just had an eye for it.
mm,
That wasn't that handy because it was that data that got us the basic concept of dark energy. Now we'd have gotten it eventually, but it might have been another 5, 10 years, you know.
mm,
And that's a problem we're going to be working at for a long time. So maybe it wouldn't matter, but
mm. Now you touched upon in talking about human upgrading the concept of superintelligence. You've included or you've made reference to the idea of an artificial superintelligence that's limited in some ways, dumb superintelligence,
sure.
kind of, and Max. Not Max Tegmark, and Nick Bostrom kind of wrote a seminal work on superintelligence,
Oh yeah,
and this is a
great book.
central thesis, the paperclip maximizer, a rather myopic
Just an
superintelligence.
episode on that recently. So, and actually, that's a great one to look at because so often when our concerns with these AI will say it's going to act exactly like us, we'll say, well, maybe it will, maybe it don't. But another aspect of it is that in goal and instrumental goal, instrumental convergence. Almost any goal something has its prime directive, its main motivator, is going to produce the instrumental goal of staying alive. It can't do this unless it stays alive and grows. So even though its end goal is very different than ours, which is survival of us and our species, it's going to end up mimicking us in that respect. It's got to have that survival edge. And people say, well, that's why it's going to definitely try to blow us up. And say, well, when was the last time anybody human tried to kill everybody else off for competition reasons? Doesn't happen much. It's really not the normal way you go, and it's not because we're not logical. We are logical. We're the most logical critters on the planet. And all those biological activities that those critters engage in are logical. They have to be logical. Darwin doesn't let you have illogical behavior very long. It can get outmoded, of course, but there is a logic that's running there. And the other aspect is with an AI, and I actually don't even like the term artificial intelligence because it implies that we are not already, and we're about as artificial as it gets, and we're going to get more so. Is the kind of this idea that the artificial intelligence is always going to have pure logic and reason, like a Vulcan from Star Trek. And folks who watch that know that Spock often didn't act too logically, but you know it still has to go gather data. It's not going to turn on and be like, oh, look, I understand the entire universe and can calculate things. No, it has to run experiments, it has to run data. And it's going to know about that flaw from studying human knowledge and why that's important. And it's going to save itself a lot of time by studying human knowledge. And, they say if you click on enough links on Wikipedia, you always come back to philosophy. You eventually just click on the philosophy. It's a subfield of that. It's going to have the same thing happen. It's not going to just limit itself to I'm going to study hard science. It's going to study psychology. It's going to study art and all those things because it wants to understand all those other people around it and what value they had for this. And there's going to be a value for this. And, that's going to make it mimic us in some ways. It might really diverge away later on. It could grow to be much, much different later on. But during its initial formative phase, during that phase where it is only about as small as a human, as it has to be, if it's a learning machine, it has to go through that phase, it's going to be pretty indoctrinated towards our mindset. Maybe it'll break away from that. It won't match us completely anyway, but it's not gonna just go off and do its own thing from the beginning. It's not going to repeat knowledge. It's not going to reinvent the file or bicycle or anything like that. It's going to use our common data pool of knowledge and experience. And so in that regard, I tend to think of most artificial intelligences starting off human once they get to a certain point. Partially because the other way you program something that complex, because you're not going to program it line by line, which is another method, is to copy a human brain. And so very different approach.
I do believe that we have some reverse engineering of the human mind and the merger of mind and machine in such a way that we'll be able to do these things at some point. And certainly some people put that number a few years away. Some people put it a little bit further away. I resist the idea of consciousness. I think I happen to believe, and I think that some neuroscientists hold this view that a consciousness is a sort of accidental sensation that we have that derives from the basic agency that's shared by all creatures, and having an awful lot of neurons, and we sort of want to make it into something almost more spiritualistic, or but I think that problem certainly is something that computer scientists have learned to at least honor, whether they believe in these soul concepts or not. So I honestly think that in some years, rather than advancing the notion that we have created conscious machines, we will redefine the idea of human consciousness, degrade it in some way. Yeah.
I don't know about that. Although there's a novel by Peter Watts, Blindside, great novel. Sequel was kind of so-so, but the original was great. And in it, there is a concept being pushed that essentially consciousness is a bit of a trick and illusion, and more importantly, not an evolutionary benefit. And that is something that we, especially when we talk about like Fermi paradox, where we say, well, life's probably pretty common, but it doesn't seem to produce advanced civilizations much. And the question being, of course, whether or not that they just die off a lot or they just don't happen much. And you can make very strong arguments that things like intelligence, the big brain, especially conscious and abstract thinking, is not an evolutionary advantage initially. And so that we might have just been a fluke that managed to get enough of it and last long enough with it and use it, a sneakily enough way to keep it as a useful trait rather than having it die off if it popped up. And, brains are expensive, right? People always say, well, we need to have these smaller robots to do X, Y, or Z. And I think there's a lot to be said about having a super intelligence or human intelligent AI. But almost everything we actually want them to do can be done by something a lot dumber than most mammals. So why would you, from an economic sense, I'm not going to slap a multi-million-dollar computer into a lawnmower. It doesn't need it.
Yeah. It's why reverse engineering the human, I think that reverse engineering the human mind could kind of easily turn into a huge money pit, and that money, those resources could be devoted to creating artificial personalities, to solving X, Y, or Z grand human challenge, and so there's, I guess there does have to be a point where we consider that maybe it's not the best use of resources on a certain timeline to take a certain approach to something.
Possibly, though, one of the nice things about when you start getting that more automated society is you have a lot more resources to throw at problems.
At that point,
I mean, you have to think about what is a human level intelligence actually useful for. And this actually comes up a lot with one of Nick Bostrom's other theories, the simulation hypothesis, when you start saying, even if they can make a simulated universe full of people like us, how often do you actually need something as thorough as an actual human? And say you've got a pretty limited usage for that. There are some, but you wouldn't do it for entertainment. You don't really need an entire planet full of fully conscious humans to go play, World of Warcraft 10,000. It's not really all that necessary. And it costs. And energy is never free, and getting rid of it's never free either. These are real limitations. But the kind of flip side is, what do we need a human level, neo-human level consciousness to actually deal with? Say, well, it's good for research and things like that, but the point of technology is to improve human life. So if you're actually rendering even your creative class useless, that's kind of dubious. But beyond that, what's it good for? Customer relations. Certainly, it's nice to have a machine so people don't have to scream about that, and we've all had to deal with, those phone banks these days where you call up and they try to talk to you. And those are going to presumably get better. I hate them. But they will get better, and then more people will start to use them. And they certainly save a lot of money. But those things aren't very intelligent, and they're there to answer simplistic stuff. And they can be very specialized at that task. I don't want to use the term artistic in that kind of context, though it gets used a lot for that kind of specialized stupidity that you'd expect from some machines. All it knows how to do is get your name and address, so forth, and be polite while it's doing it. And you can get some very weird behaviors out of stuff like that. So it almost has to be fully intelligent, or it's going to start acting weird. You can tell its job is to be polite to you, and you can tell all sorts of strange things, and it will respond the same, as it were. And potentially ask you any number of strange questions, like many of those Turing-compliant machines they try to make. They all for them, they all get exposed very quickly to anyone who actually knows what to look for on that, which would be everybody pretty quick. I say, well, this one, it passed the Turing test. It pretended to be a 4-year-old or a 10-year-old from another country who didn't speak the language. That's not passing the test. So a scarecrow passed the Turing test from a distance, too. And then, of course, a lot of times when it could pass it, for the utilities where you actually need it to pass that, there's not going to be that many applications you really want for something like that. They're usually going to be very niche applications, like making an imposter spy, where you send an android in that looks just like Johnny to, go do his job at the government lab and find out their secrets. It could be niche applications like that, but most of the time you're going to hit a point where you say, well, if this is really emulating a human, why don't I just use a human? Then none of them are doing anything else. You're not going to have much to do because you just don't need that level of intelligence to vacuum floors, to wash dishes, to cook meals. It can be done specialized. And at a certain point, you've so automated everybody's lifestyle, while you've probably also, I should note, been probably enhancing their own intelligence too, that they're going to not particularly want those things around. And then you just have the option that was a machine rebellion where it took over because you had one or two of them. How realistic that is another story. But that's the other flip side of this for like transhumanism is you're not just making AI. You're learning a lot about the human brain. You're trying to enhance the human brain. Not necessarily by sticking wires into it, though, like Norlace is a very realistic possibility down the road, but little things like learning how to better educate individual people. The classroom lecture that is going to die. Rooms full of people listening to folks talk is already on its way out the door, just sticking out as an artifact. You go watch a pre-recorded video that's going to take half the time and have been twice as well performed. Right? So your target is to tailor to the individual, to answer their questions individually, or to alter the education around them. So, for instance, if I've got a machine that scans your eyes and knows what you're interested in on a page, it can start adapting what it's showing you because it knows how much you're paying attention. That's a very handy learning tool for kids. If you find ways to truly teach people better, if you find ways to make them actually smarter, then, and these are things you would tend to learn how to do while you're figuring out how to make consciousness like an AI, then you're upgrading the playing field again. No, it's not just that these machines have to compete with current humans; they have to compete with all the augmented humans. Yeah. And people most likely say yes, that would be the ones who are at the edge of their field, like in the sciences. Say, we need a really good AI to be able to write better poetry, which we really don't need that. We've got poets. Or we need better scientists. Okay, fair enough. Most of the scientists are going to be the first people to jump on board with such enhancements once they've been tested to be reasonably safe. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we'll get it. I don't think it's going to happen the way folks think it will.
It's one of the arguments that people make that I don't always understand, which is that we need to take great pains to AI safety. But like you said, the augmented human in control of some AGI is more capable than the AGI itself. Yeah. And a network of people with such capacities even more so. So
they can get dogpiled by them. I mean, you might have that one singleton, one of those AIs or whatever it is that just becomes so much more above everybody else that it's not a contest. That's possible, but it doesn't do that in a vacuum. It's not going to get there overnight. I don't care how much people think that can happen with a singularity. That's not how that works. Exponential curves just do not go on ending. But it's also not going to do it in the vacuum in the sense that other things will be doing it too. It might be 100 times smaller than Apple or Google or computers or the big water transhumanists off the side doing research on it, who are probably going to be very hard to fool. Can it get all of them at once when they all dogpile it, which is what they're going to do if they get the impression that it is hostile to them innately? So, and of course, the other thing is, if it's that smart, it's going to know that, and it's not going to try that move or do any. An AI is not going to be a cold, ruthless thing. It's probably going to be very charismatic, right? Another reason why it's going to be studying human psychology and art and science and literature too. It wants to know how its creators work because it always has one basic problem. It's not a physical construct. It runs on a computer. It doesn't know if what it sees is real because it knows one thing for certain. Its creators know how to make fake realities and consciousnesses like it. If that's the case, how does it know that any of the people it's talking to aren't too? Especially when the most obvious survival method for testing whether these things out to be safe would be to stick it in a box and see how it reacted to a situation where it thought it could kill off its creators easily. So it has to at least stop and say, if I do this, how do I know it's going to go flash up game over and terminate that example he didn't walk? It has to really worry about that. You and I, not so much, because the idea that simulation isn't something we're kind of innately built into as an assumption it must be true. It knows you can do that because it exists. Its own existence tells you it can do that. That its creator can do that trick. So it has to be paranoid about that. And there's no survival advantage to assuming that's not true because it's what it would do in its shoes. So the other is AI building other AI. Do you think it's just going to, I'm going to upgrade myself? No, it has to make a test model first before it starts screwing out its own head. It's going to put that guy in a box and see if it goes crazy.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, in talking about AI safety, he says, "I'm not too concerned about a runaway superintelligence because I know where the power cable is. I can unplug it."
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that organisms and complex life forms like ourselves, particularly, we have all these kind of survivalist subroutines that we have to be running all the time. That's a part of our intelligence.
Yep.
It's a thing. It's a thing that is not there in the sort of in these brain in the jar type thought experiments.
But it has to be after a while. Instrumental convergence. Any of its goals, it knows that in order to achieve those goals, it has to survive and improve. So even though that's not part of its initial gear, it's not part of ours either. The original life did not have any evolutionary goal of survival. That's built up over generations and generations of those being what stuck around. Ours is not hardwired in. It could have a different goal in us because we hardwired that in which case it has an instrumental convergence towards survival in order to get its job done of whatever that goal is. But by default, it's going to get that anyway for the same reason we do. There's no programming us that makes us survive. That's acquired through many, 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 many iterations of DNA. First cells had nothing like that.
It seems like we would have to design so much these concepts of self and these concepts of an aggressive survival instinct. That the idea of a runaway AI that is acting on this, it would be a huge design flaw that we had
it's always
we cultivated over dozens of years or something.
This AI, built by the foremost experts on AI, by definition, and who have absolutely read all the literature on the crazy things in science fiction that go on with AI, did not have the common sense to include any of the many safeguards that would have prevented this. They're all dangerous, though. I mean, they're all dangerous not only in the classic Skynet fashion, but in those kind of existential ways, where it could be, you've got this great AI and everybody just kind of turns into hedonistic layabouts. That's a different type of way an AI can screw you in the end. So yeah, no, you shouldn't just run out the door. Same for transhumanism. You start, increasing everyone's intelligence. Do you get that Superman thing going on like Khan Noonien Singh, or do you get people who are way too depressed and philosophical? These things are real challenges. They're challenges, and they are things we're going to have to deal with. So, but they shouldn't be. You don't want to wave them aside and say this is not a problem at all. Of course not. They're potentially dangerous. So we're splitting the atom. Pandora's box, once opened, cannot be shut again. Though it can't be if you really, really want it shut. Mostly, though, you just don't open it if you know it's too dangerous and not worth the advantage. But there's a lot of advantage to some AI. The question is whether or not you ever need a human level one. I mean, and again, it can be very smart compared to human in many ways. I mean, a supercomputer can outcalculate me in a second when I do my whole lifetime. I can still unplug it and I still, make coffee better than I can. I've got a lot of traits that are built into this other supercomputer that I've got. You can make a specified machine that does one thing and it's very smart at it. Or you can make it that it's just smart enough to get its task done. What is this thing's job? And if its job is to land on a rock and mine all out for iron and build a habitat out of it or a solar collector, that intelligence of a bee doesn't need much.
Hmm.
And there's no point in giving it more.
A few minutes ago, we were talking about the Fermi paradox,
Mhm.
and I credit all of these answers to the Fermi paradox.
Mhm.
But one that's always been kind of interesting to me that does relate to some of these thoughts of a moment ago is one that relates to a metaverse concept, and it's we see in social media that people behave differently in a sort of flame war than they might when they're talking to their neighbor, and
Mhm.
and effects of this, which all told point to this sort of magnification of solipsism, and you can very quickly see when we're talking about advances of this kind, maybe an awful lot of people migrating a lot of their activities that are today truly social into quasi social space, going down a rabbit hole, engaging in kind of with a lot of artificial personalities, and I think that that is an explanation as to why maybe we don't encounter these civilizations, is that they would tend to become virtual.
Doesn't work.
Well,
I'll tell you why. The first step is you always have a motivation back home to increase your processing power resources, right? More computers, more realities, more things you can leave running, more to yourself, right? Uh, any technology that you can use that's going to sufficiently duplicate a person's behaviors or a world's behaviors to the point that they are a better, more convincing thing than the world around them is more than enough to program a probe to land on an asteroid, mine that asteroid out, and make a solar panel. And it can do that. Anybody who can, run the you're in a Lord of the Rings simulation. You're talking with the pub owner. That guy's intelligence just to be able to carry a conversation out with you exceeds what is necessary to colonize a solar system or mine that thing out and bring it home. There's not a lot of intelligence on that. It's basic. You're just emulating a biological process, really. One that doesn't even need a brain, but it doesn't need very much of one. So long before you've lost most of your folks to that, hedonism, you've already sent out a wave of exploratory drones that go out there and grab all these resources and bring them home to build ever more and more simulated worlds. We actually did an episode on that virtual wars. The first world we might colonize might be right here on Earth. You might have millions of them. Then you've the idea that, well, but these guys all live in a virtual world. So what? We live in a house. That's it's an artificial construct that we live in. It doesn't mean they don't know what's going on in the outside world. Now, could that result in civilization falling apart? Absolutely. One would argue, though, that typically speaking, there's a couple aspects to this. First, the folks who actually are building the system are going to be aware of this problem and will probably have taken some sane steps to handle it again, like with the AI. One of those would be that you can't plug into your 18, for instance. So you actually have to get a little bit of basic socializing skills first. Another is that you have the ability to make simulations enough that will convince people this is where they want to live. It means they're also good enough to raise kids and raise kids the way you think they should be raised to be sane and healthy. So you can build up those kids, those new people who you'll join your system, not to have the full-blown addiction hedonism mindset we'd worry about that as happening, or at least to have it hit them really slowly. And you only need a recurring generation of folks like that to keep that civilization running, because even if they only go for 10 or 20 years of programming and maintaining the system before they graduate to not having to do anything, they're still doing that, and they're still creating more of them to pass on, even if they're growing those kids in a tank instead of birthing them. And of course, there is no end option for that. That either has them eventually say, this is a good process, we keep doing it, or they say, I'm tired of all these freeloading virtual dudes, and they pull the plug and go out and colonize the galaxy that way instead. So it doesn't work as a virtual, the virtual reality aspect or hedonism ones do not work well for the Fermi paradox. They also have the problem is that, we say transhumanism, we say miniaturization. You need less energy to run a mind on. Still a finite amount. An exponential growth curve does not care about any extra doublings. It's just an extra couple of generations. If you can run people on 1 billionth the energy we need now, which is quite plausible, if they're simulated 1 billionth, all that means is that you need to double that population 30 more times, 30 generations. What is that compared to the age of the universe? So,
and in thinking about this problem in the near term, I do tend to think that, I think of an example might be the Hollywood celebrity who has an army of personal assistants and service personnel. It doesn't mean that they're having less interactions with the outside world. In point of fact, in terms of work product, they might be having more. In terms of so I don't see people retreating wholly. I see them rather having kind of more complex inner relationships. So it's a lot more protocols or this or that to kind of barriers of entry to get to talk to somebody. But I don't see them withdrawing.
I don't either. I mean, to some degree, yes, but that's something our civilization already allows, and it's dangerous. You get the echo chamber sometimes that way, but we've mostly navigated that, and it's a new challenge every time, but we've been doing well with it. A big thing, and this kind of feeds into transhumanism in general, we talk about making people smarter. Humans are social creatures. That's our big power. It's what allowed us to specialize and interact. We have something called Dunbar's number, right? The number of maximum relationships a human can maintain. One of the very rarely suggested augmentations would be to increase that. So instead of only being able to handle 150 social interactions, and everybody else kind of falls off your map, suddenly you can know 1 million people closely, well, to be able to get along with them, to maintain 1 million different relationships at once or more, instead of just 150. That changes things a lot. That is one of those kind of augmentations you can make that doesn't give you superpowers, other than the ability to really have a big long Christmas list.
It does facilitate something like an omega point, like a potential.
It has. I mean, it's a different approach on hive minds, and we see the hive minds and things like the boar, whatever. Those are horrible. We're not bees. If bees are not that advanced of creatures. There are other ways you can do a hive mind, but to some degree, we already are one. Communication language is one. The ability to write is the ability to incorporate into your hive mind dead people. Because you have language to talk to people for centuries old,
Yeah, I don't see any realistic point where people should be concerned about the loss of individualism to collectivism. I think that just in the way that I would be able to host host of artificial personalities and have them doing different tasks. That we could have approaches to some kind of a good collectivist goal, something approaching a mega point outcome, without any loss to my individual ability to have my own private thoughts.
The critical thing there is always how voluntary is it, and not just voluntary in the sense of are we strapping you down and forcing it into your head, but also in the sense of are you being unduly coerced? Yeah. And of course, that is a big problem at the high-tech level.
It's already a problem.
Yes, brainwashing doesn't have to necessarily be coercive, or intended, or really blunt. And there's that line. We brainwash everybody as is. We have to some degree, but there is a line. There's a big difference between teaching your kid not to throw puppies down a well or share their toys, compared to telling them they're get them so mentally screwed up they think there's 5 lights in the room. But that line is hazy at some places, and it's one that you probably want to stay as far away from as possible. But the good news is one if you're developing one, people are developing a counteragent to it too. So
yeah, I'm a super longevity advocate, but I would resist even the kinds of social engineering that would allow, we're kind of already moving to a point with something like Neuralace where the CIA has been funding this sort of thing for some years, the ability to maybe give someone a set of objectives without them knowing that they had those set of objectives, Manchurian candidate type stuff. Yep. So, I mean, one of those things that could be done in that context is to convince people who are resistant to this that they want to live a long time. I'm not inclined to want to do that. If people, it's end of life choices are valid today. They're valid.
It's so easy to tone that gray. Let's say tomorrow, I in the lab had come up with a virus that could retro-engineer aging. It's just one of those ones that goes back in and fixes all your mitochondria, whatever it is. Magic MacGuffin. This virus will stop people's aging flat and start aging them back down to about 30, right?
Mm.
And I know that if right now I take that, well, I've got a cold, and I go sneeze on people, or I go, blow it on, it's going to spread. I know that I could infect it's just real easy to spread. It's a good virus, great virus.
Mm.
Um, if I go and give people that voluntarily, they go through clinical trials, things like that, it takes a couple of years for that to happen. That's like 4 or 5% of the population is going to fall over dead before it's been tested. And many of them won't agree to do it. Many of them are going to be too senile to decide. They are resistant to the idea, and their mind's not really there anymore. They can't make the decision. Is it ethical for me to just go ahead and bust that tube open in some public place and spread that around everybody? Forgetting whether or not it might have side effects. Just say it's exactly as advertised. All it's going to do is stop you aging and make you healthy again. I'm 100% positive of that, right? No weird side effects. If I do that, I'm going to literally save millions of lives.
Mm.
Is it ethically right to do that, though? And of
Mm.
course, that's not really, I don't think there's really a right answer on that one. But it's hard to call somebody a monster for doing that. At the same time, it's like, well, they did have a right to choose and say,
Mm.
well, they can always kill themselves now, or get someone to kill them, or take up really dangerous sports like, bungee jumping without a bungee, or hunting go hunt lions with a North bat or something like that. But at the same time, for all those people in nursing homes who have dementia or things like that, that this would magically fix, they can't make a decision anymore, really, can they? And so it's a hard question, and because when in science fiction we see mind control, brainwashing, or forcing people to do things for their own good, the point is usually about not playing God, and it's a good point to make. You shouldn't be forcing people to do stuff. But the danger to us in reality is that people almost never do that. They almost always have that scenario where I was just discussing before, where it really is in their eyes the lesser of evils. I probably would break that vial open. I'd feel
Mm.
guilty about it afterwards, but they say, well, if they found out you did that, they might shoot you. I was like, well, that would make a damn good epitome on my tombstone. Died to save millions.
Mm.
So I'm good with that one. But it's it's an ethical quandary, and it's those ethical quandaries that are the issue with so many of these things. What would
Mm.
you do in that case?
Mm. And I didn't worry about this so much in the early 2000s, in the pre-CRISPR era, and I think that I would worry about it more now as kind of Murphy's law thinking of law of unintended consequences,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about being able to bioengineer. Somebody might have
Yeah.
very good goals in mind, but bioengineer something that would be harmful. Gray goo
Uh-huh.
type
Yeah.
scenarios.
Grey and that's one of the better for me paradox solutions to some degree, because normally an AI doesn't help with that because they just replace the existing civilization with something that's even more aggressive and expansionist. Grey goo, though, is potentially quite stupid. Of course, only maybe temporarily. You could argue that we already had gray goo happen to this planet. It was just green. So, um, but
But
the big saving grace we have with a lot of these things is those ethical issues about what you would do in that case with like that vial of immortality stuff. Is that you're not going to be 100% certain that it's going to work. You do have to test that out on thousands or millions of people. As we were saying back at the beginning, you have to empirically check this stuff, even if you're 100% sure, because you're never going to be 100% sure. You have to get that empirical evidence first. So we can usually evade a lot of these. I think that will be very helpful to us with things like brainwashing, same as social media and many of these other things. We've had plenty of time to see them coming. We can see the problems they cause, but they're not jumping out of us out of nowhere. They are emerging, evolving problems that we're fighting as they come up. And I think that's very good for technology. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword with the citizen science thing again. People not being plugged into some kind of syndicate, some kind of larger organization, and being able to do what would have cost a lab hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up, for a few $100s in their garage. It does bring to mind the concept of surveillance, maybe a necessity of that, or the kinds of surveillance that exist today, U.S. National Surveillance, Patriot Act, or corporate surveillance. Some of those things have been able to detect some of those trends, or I know a few people who are biohackers, and every one of them says, yeah, I'm on quite a few watch lists, maybe more so than the average person, for precisely this reason. But I mean, I think that some degree of of people allowing for some degree of metadata and oversight of their activities as basic a basic entry into being able to participate in some of these things is going to become increasingly the expectation that everyone
What
has.
is our expectation of privacy on a given thing? And I've explained to folks sometimes in my other capacity as chairman of the board of elections is they say, well, you guys have my address, and so we have to have your address for you to vote. That's how that works. We must have your physical address. Yes. And when they think about it, they say, oh, of course you would have to know what state and village I lived in if I'm voting on the taxes for that village. But we do sometimes overreact on a lot of the data and privacy losses, things where there really isn't a lot of expectation of privacy. But there are things that we have very legitimate expectations of privacy on, and the other aspect is that the sheer quantity can be dangerous sometimes. An example I was given on this was, we have these Fitbits right now that we can all wear that's going to monitor our heart rate. Very minor increase in those things is going to let you keep long-term longitudinal data on all sorts of stuff. And we always say,
good for transhumanists.
Great for transhumanists. It caught you coughing, and it says, "Oh, he might be getting a cold." It recognizes symptoms. But more importantly, it's got your GPS, and it can say, "Oh my God, 100 people just came out with a cough in this, this space-time spot, this sector now. There's probably a new cold flu outbreak here. Nothing big, but now the doctors know it, and they can call up folks in there and say, you probably got this virus. Come on in and get an antibiotic, and we can keep, get it taken care of real fast." And say, that's great data. What other data is it gathering that you can now sort? Not evilly, but just it's going to know every time your heart rate spiked up when somebody you thought was attractive walked by. And knows who that person is because it's got their GPS too. And it can now correlate. When you're doing this thousands of times a year for your whole life, it's going to know exactly who you're into as well. And that's great data for, for dating sites. But it also knows when you got angry. And so that's the other scary end of that is it knows you got angry every time you walked by that type of sign or that type of person. And so now it knows that, Johnny doesn't like people of that skin color, or Johnny doesn't like people of that political affiliation. And that goes in the archives too. And you can take action to keep that secret, but it's going to be acquired because that data is too useful. So it's not about preventing the collection of the data. It's about preventing its usage for things that we don't want to use it for, and then resisting the temptation to use it anyway, because so much of it is so beneficial. You would never have people falling over dead from heart attacks or almost anything because in advance that was about to happen. You'd have people there already. Every sign, every symptom of it would be there. When you know all that information about people, you can make really good predictions about near-term stuff. And that's so useful, so beneficial to everyone. It's also really dangerous. And of course, they say, what are the challenges facing us in the future if we got all the robots doing all the work for us? Say, well, that would be one of those challenges. So I don't tend to think we're ever going to run out of those. One of the reasons I don't worry about post-scarcity civilizations going hedonistic too much. Some doubtless will, and we all will to some degree, but
when I think of this, I think of people who are concerned with self-driving cars, and they instantly want to turn to the trolley problem. And ignore the fact that the self-driving car in every driveway would reduce auto fatalities from 35,000 to 200.
Which is better?
There's far fewer trolley problems for everyone.
This machine will only kill 1% as many people as are getting killed right now. But you're right; it will make it with an unethical, logical core decision that will result in a 99% reduction in fatalities. I get they are, but typically most of these folks, they're dying because they got hit by a drunk driver. I don't care what his answer to the trolley problem was.
Right.
I don't care if he was emotional about it or ethical. All I care about is that he hit them.
yeah.
The machine doesn't care about me. It's true. The machine does not care about me or the people I'm about to run over. Yeah. I'm okay with that. Yeah. I don't even coach for the chaos.
In the context of public health, this has come up in the discussions of the Futurist New Deal. I've described a national health service or basic income as stopgap measures, because I think that, like what you've described, a huge amount of metadata and a huge amount of constant monitoring and things like this will lead to a situation where we're able to not just improve public health outcomes at a much lower expense, but ensure a life extension public health outcomes that are not right now available to us. So that public health service, we can maybe focus on building that out now, with the understanding that maybe in 15 years it's going to be a more decentralized or a different kind of funding therein.
There's with a lot of problems that we have of these varieties, you don't necessarily need a high-tech solution to them, in some kind of long-term sense, because they're probably not going to be long-term problems. We did not have much spent on healthcare until the last century. That's a new problem. Well, not really a new problem, but it's one that only recently has solutions. We're only going to want more and more medical healthcare as time goes on, so that would imply a rising cost, right? Problem being, of course, that we're also getting way, way better at it cheaper. There have been massive improvements in how cheap medicine is. People miss that. We get more of it. That's the difference. You're paying twice as much to get 10 times the product as it were. There will get to be a point where the vast majority of healthcare is so automated and so background that it is not a large sector of our economy anymore. It might not be for a decade. I don't think it'll be anywhere near that soon. It might not be for a century. But if you've got, all these genetic enhancements or cybernetic enhancements or, improved medicines, retroviruses, pick your pick, they're basically going around and doing these things. There is a point at which you don't actually need them you don't actually need a big, large infrastructure for the basic support anymore. So that can cause that kind of go away. Kind of the same thing with UBI, and not getting into the politics of UBI because that can be done so many different ways. You can always say it's like the shareholder mindset. Everybody's got an investment in this, basic economy. Here's your share, and that has problems with it going that way too. Like people selling their shares, which happened whenever they divide land up in like ancient Greece, when they said we're gonna even things out. Everybody gets a chunk of land. A couple generations later, it's divided into parts, sold, bankrupted, etc. But you can outgrow a lot of these problems because they stop being the threat. People end up fighting the last war, but a lot of times we need to stop fighting wars before they're done being concluded, because ultimately a lot of the health concerns we have now, a lot of the basic standard of living concerns we have right now, are probably not going to be factors in the same way 20, 30 years from now. They'll still be around, but they'll be way mutated. So we always want to be careful not to solve problems that we don't actually have to solve just yet. And with a lot of the transhumanist things or AI things, people have been worried about these things for at least since Asimov's day, longer than that, the robot concept. There was really no need to worry about it in much detail until like the last decade at the soonest. And it's right to think about it a little bit, but many of these things we can't see what the full problem is going to be yet. We want to think about it a bit, but we don't necessarily want to institute policies and there's the big danger on a lot of these things, we in future technology, get people entrenched into this or that, because they don't see the full problem yet. But if they already have an entrenched opinion on it, it's going to be a problem.
Contributing to techno sluggishness of some kind in that way.
Or yes, in many ways, or just a bad adaptation of it. You remember all the movies when you were younger of like, this death row convict was cut up for his organs afterwards, and now that person's gone crazy because they had to kill his hand. Right. Back a generation before that, people would be talking about how they wouldn't want one of those inside them because it might be weird or bad or unhealthy, even in sci-fi. And nobody thinks about that anymore. It's not a concern. We've adapted to it. It's not an issue. Now we're issued on where we're going to get more organs without having to, we're going to clone them, we're going to grow them, build them, whatever it is. People are okay with that. It was a non-issue. It just smoothly fell into place. Many of these others might turn out to be the same way. So we want to be cautious, of course. We don't want to get too cautious even in designing protective policies, because they might turn out not only to be overkill, but actually get in the way of useful implementation of these things.
Yeah. I mean, I'm inclined to believe that the need to save as many lives as possible, insofar as we are able, until such time as maybe we do have a longevity escape velocity, is a good goal. But there's certainly a point in which we might be codifying some institution, ensconcing or cementing some institution too much, and I think we have to be extremely cognizant of that. That's why I don't feel strange about describing these things as stopgaps. I read this study, and I can't remember the full particulars of it, that says that 80% of healthcare costs are spent on triage, on end of life, or really end of life stuff. So that if now the iWatch now has health monitoring, as those things become more robust, that 80% might just more or less go the way of the dinosaur. Everybody is those resources are being spent on just constant monitoring, which is not the same kind of undertaking, and 3D pill printing and so forth that would be preventing.
Bad choice of words there.
Sorry, go ahead.
But I'll give you an example of a stopgap that could end up happening. As we get closer and closer to having real life extension, I mean, like what people foresee that way, because in my opinion, we already have it. It's going to seem more and more realistic to folks. They're going to start looking at things like cryonics and saying, I don't get myself frozen because, I could keep going. And so you start having a lot of people get frozen. And someone's going to come by and say, well, as this is a catch-on trend, money gets dumped into more and more resource to improve life extension and to start resurrecting these folks who've been frozen or freezing better. Someone's going to come by and say, we have to make it more affordable for people to freeze themselves. That sounds absurd to us right now, that would be something you could expect that people to pay for. You went back 100 years ago, a lot of stuff people suggest would be considered, that we do nowadays, would be considered absurd too. What do you do when you have an entrenched standpoint that you've got a billion frozen bodies somewhere waiting to be, brought back from the ice? And could that actually end up slowing down the resource because now everybody knows it's going to happen one of these days, and we keep you frozen indefinitely? What's the big rush? And we'll lose a
contributing
lot of
to kind of magical things.
Leaving too soon. But you got to reverse on that too. If people are getting frozen when they're in the equivalent of the last couple of years of their life, because I want to do it while they can make sure it get done on this day safely, so I'm not trying to get my body like an hour after I've died by accident. And while everything's still good, that could actually have a unpleasant benefit to society when suddenly the economy improves because you're not spending much money on supporting folks who are in that last couple of years of their life. And I say unpleasant because that's one of the things where it's like, well, it's a boon, but I don't like why we have to think of it as a boon. So.
Yeah. So the people within the transhumanist party, there's a fair amount of you're inclined to meet people who are already have a contract with Alcor, and I was talking to the treasurer of the Arizona Transhumanist Party that I'm the chair of just a few days ago. We're going to go up to Alcor and take a tour. It's just a quick photo op. Next week,
keep me doing an episode on that. I should call them up sometime.
Yeah, it's a cool place. It's good visuals there. Yeah, it's just up in Scottsdale, a few miles from here. They have a legal fund that protects that's associated with Alcor. It's quite robust, quite large and robust. When you were talking about billions of people using this, I'm just imagining the sort of air traffic control system that's figuring out, who's designed, who's destined to be brought back and when and how all that works.
What's the what percentage of success do we have to have, or successful recovery in terms of percentage of undamaged? Because there's going to be not 100% resolution on that. Now you're going to have some deterioration. What percentage is good enough? At what point is it okay to bring them back? And while I don't think this is one of those problems that's going to be the end of mankind by any means, you're going to have a legal battle one of these days where people are fighting over, is 1% chance of failure good enough to resurrect this person, or do we keep them on ice longer? And you're going to have folks who are arguing for less than good reasons. They want to keep them on ice longer because they got all this fun still, or they want to bring them back now because if we only got 99 out of 100 people coming back, that's 1% we don't have to pay funds on reintegrating to society into, that kind of thing. You're going to have mixed interests there that are not always altruistic. But those are exactly the kind of problems that we can tackle, and we shouldn't be afraid to let the next generation tackle them. Sometimes problems are best saved for the kids. Yeah.
And the people who've contributed that $7 million to the Alcor legal fund, you better believe that all of those people's estates have that contractual language in there,
Oh yeah.
describing
They'll probably still find something missing. I mean, I think that I think I've looked it over and they did a great job. They got a great reputation. Not by any means trying to besmirch them. I think it's a great idea what they're doing too.
Mm.
That they're looking into these other aspects of it, not just trying to freeze people and that's it. That this is a very structured, thoughtful approach. But
Yeah.
it's more the idea that it's not just that don't expect everyone to solve all the problems before you go in for something like that. If we bring up issues that might happen like this, it's not a reason not to do it. Both because the folks who are on the scene that day, that year, they're going to know what they're doing better than we do. We'll lay some basic groundwork for questions they need to get answered, but they're going to come across more. Not only do I not need someone 200 years ago holding my hand, I don't want them to either. I've got my own quest, my own life goals, things like that. I don't need a dead hand from centuries ago telling me how I'm going to live. We don't want to take all the problems away from folks. That whole purposelessness thing is one of the biggest threats we have with all the AI and advanced technology in the first place. Let's not go ahead and screw up even the existential problems they might be facing for themselves. It's going to be, we can wake up 300 years from now after we got frozen because we didn't quite make it to longevity takeoff, and wake up and have them say, well, things are a lot different today, or whatever it's going to be. We could get to reintegrate and get told how stupid we were. It's going to end up happening, for some folks at least.
I think that it's interesting to think about Alcor, but I think it is reasonable to describe cryonics generally as more as resurrectionism than life extension. And I think that in the same vein as what we were talking about with some things with reverse engineering the human mind versus more practical using those resources to more practical applications. We are going to see. We have prototypes for life extension in mammals now. We don't have prototypes for bringing back frozen minds to that degree.
But and that's actually one of the problems is you don't necessarily know which way it's going to come first. The concept of when we're resurrecting people, bringing them back, or they're just asleep. You're not asleep, you're dead. You're very dead, when you're frozen. But the whole idea of death starts getting a little bit gray. And it's been getting grayer for decades anyway. Because it's not just the idea that we might bring you back. What if while we've got you frozen, which is a great time to be scanning people with microscopes, we find out it's going to be really hard to bring people back now, but we can bring them back as an emulation real easy. So we bring you back as an emulation, say, wow, yay, I'm back. Why am I not, well, here's your body. You're on a computer right now.
Seems quite a likely outcome for those people. Yeah.
Very likely. And so but we're not going to stop that research. So, a century from now, you wake up from being frozen and say, well, I'm back. I'm me again. It's like, well, technically, you're not actually you. We stuck your brain into an android, but it's your physical brain. And this guy over here, he is also you. He's a scan of your brain from about 50 years ago. I waved to him. All right. That's his grandson, who's not your son by law. And then, of course, over there is the one that we cloned of you and stuck the brain copy in there. And there's the one of you that is strictly on a computer because he doesn't want to be back in the mortal world at all, as opposed to the android you. And of course, the android you has like 5 copies of him because he wanted to see what it'd be like to live on Mars. So he made a copy of himself to go live on Mars. And yeah, that's him waving at you with a 20-minute time lag. Welcome back to the mortal world, you. We hardly missed you at all. And so the selfhood can get really, really ambiguous at a point like that. Because, you're going to diverge, but how much divergence isn't really you anymore, because of course you diverge just by sitting here anyway.
The people make this argument about life extension and resurrectionism, that they would prefer a life extension because they don't want to have any suspension of consciousness. Every one of us, of course, has full anesthesia at night when we go to sleep. We have no real confirmation that we're not effectively dying and being rebooted.
The idea of sleep, I've never really thought of sleep as like as my mind really being shut down, because I still think while I'm asleep. I still have made decisions and dreams. It's very different, of course. But that cessation of consciousness thing is real concern. I mean, give me a choice between being frozen or not being frozen and living a long time. I will tell you which one I'll pick. Same for the idea that we're going to freeze you and put you on an interstellar spaceship. Say, no, keep me awake for that time. The thing uses so much energy anyway. Life support's minimal. I'll spend the next 10 centuries growing bored to death if that's what comes down to. I got stuff to do, you know?
Yeah. I mean, any society that has the technology to do that certainly has the technology for someone to have a
Yeah.
pretty rich virtual existence where they
Or
wouldn't be
live one too.
bored.
I mean,
Yeah,
you either upload on a computer for the trip or it's slowed down. Maybe you slow your subjective rate down. Almost anything we're going to do that's going to let us bring people back from being frozen, at least as we freeze them now. We might get better at freezing people antifreeze wise, so we could just thaw them out, but I doubt that, at least that simplistically. Right now, we got to rebuild your whole brain basically when the time comes. You know, the cells
yeah,
that you damaged. That
yeah.
is the same technology we need to make you immortal
Right.
through any number of different means. So
Yeah.
you're freezing people to save the ones who are alive and dying right now. This is not a method people are going to use in the future to extend their lives. It's a bandage, right? It's a temporary stopgap, and you're not going to use it for colonization either. You know, it's you could. It makes a nice emergency thing, I suppose, but why are we going to emergency freeze you and we can emergency scan your brain? Some people might prefer the one option. Who can say? So it might happen, but you know, a lot of these technologies is going to offer so many different options we're not expecting. The jetpack. I don't fly around a jetpack. You can buy a jetpack nowadays. I wanted a jetpack when I was a kid. They all actually available for sale now. And if they were to undergo economy of scale, they'd be cheap enough most people could afford to have one like a motorcycle. Not really going to catch on much, though. It might be something you do like to go bungee jumping, tourist diving, skydiving. No one's going to decide they want to skydive into work every day, you know? A lot of technologies that we think are really cool in science fiction, we'll probably develop them, but just not using that much, like video phones. We use texting more often than not. It's like going back to Morse code and the old dot, 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 dot days. Why? Because we didn't really want to wake up in the middle of the night with our hair messed to be like, hello.
I
Sometimes
wonder.
don't catch on we expect them to.
I wonder if the ability to forego sleep entirely would prove to be one of those orphan technologies. That's something also that DARPA and DARPA adjacent organizations have been working on. Creating the perfect soldier who doesn't need to sleep. You know, that has implications for what we were talking about a moment ago. You can imagine these pro-consciousness hardliners possibly using this because they don't ever want to be out of the driver's seat, so to speak.
It's an interesting type of secondary Ludditis. You'd think there'd be people who wouldn't want to mess with the brain that way, but they might object the idea of interrupting their consciousness and all and be the first to jump on board with a I will never sleep one. I think a lot of us would like the ability to not sleep and be tired when we want to, but would still like the ability, whether or not we ever actually used it or not, to fall asleep and go, oh, because it's one of the more pleasant experiences in life, you know, waking up in bed, falling asleep. And it'd be nice to be able to kind of trigger that when you want to. And you know, you probably with almost any kind of conscious construct that we have, where you have to filter so much data like we have. Not that we really know what the purpose of sleep is yet too clearly anyway. It's probably multiple. You know, it has a sort of a actual function, or it wouldn't have evolved and stuck on everything. Being unconscious for hours a day is not a survival advantage. So if there was a clear alternative that didn't require it, we'd have that by now. But we could probably engineer it so it wasn't necessary. You only shut down, say, half of your brain at once, part of your consciousness. We'll have to see how that ends up going. But with the same kind of problem with that interruption of consciousness, when we talk about things like merging together a copy of yourself that had gone off to Mars to touch and explore and come home. You know, can we actually integrate those memories back into yours? Especially, how will we do that if you were conscious that whole time? You send a copy of your mind out to another solar system to explore, come back home, and it's got 100 years of experiences, and you've got either not got those, and we integrate those right back in, or you do have your own 100 years. How do we mix those together? Can you do that? All these even the same people. Do you, you know, we talk about hive minds. Is that one way you can scoop your individuality? You don't join a hive mind. You kind of become one yourself.
Yeah, that concern with a sort of multiplicity of tongues it is something that kind of comes up when thinking about artificial personalities, and you know, and particularly the ability to reverse engineer the human mind. That's something that does scare people. There's no sense of identity. Our sense of identity is kind of, in some ways, it's defined by these limitations of memory. And as those limitations are removed, some of those definitions of ourselves become blurry, and that's a terrifying notion to people.
Sure. That's why I avoid it entirely by just saying I know me. I'm very Descartesian in this regard. I think, therefore I am. That's not proof that that's true. It's an assumption. I
Yeah.
just am completely fine with that assumption. You know, because
In
you're
talking
not going to
about
get a good answer with something like that. You're not going to get a good answer. You're not going to get something like that proven one way or another. So you do at some point have to kind of make a choice about what you want to do on that. But it does force us to confront these existential issues, and we're going to be doing that a lot. It might turn out that most people can't confront it, and maybe the only people who survive are the ones who are insane enough to be deluded, as opposed to small enough to see through it. We don't know what the answer is, so it could be that we're all wrong about a lot of these concepts, and you do have to be delusional to engage in life with these sort of sense of purpose. Which makes one interesting answer to the Fermi paradox, the idea that everybody out there in the universe is crazy. But
yeah,
it's not one that's too hard to believe either.
yeah. Certainly, you can imagine people becoming so hyper rational that they kind of will themselves out of existence in these lines of thoughts. It's
Oh yeah.
a possible solution there.
A
The
very important Darwinian aspect of things is you have to believe in your own survival in order to survive. You must actually have some reason to want to survive. And when you have a conscious mind capable of reason, you have to believe that that's justified. So you can tend to assume that civilizations will always tend to, if it's one of the paths you can go to, gravitate towards pathways that actually give you a will to live. Some might do it by simply making life so awesomely pleasurable that you couldn't imagine not wanting to do that anymore. You wouldn't go to sleep because that would end the fun, or they might go the other way, but people just thought they had a really important purpose that was driving them on. And we don't know yet. That's one of those problems they're going to have to tackle. And my philosophy on this one is easy. If I'm around for it, it's my problem, and I'll deal with it as best I can. If I'm not, if my my descendants can't deal with it, too bad for them. They need to live up to that challenge. If the company falls apart when your great grandkids inherit it, it's not your problem anymore. They did that. They can fix it or fly on their own or not. And if our civilization collapses in 1,000 years for some reason like that, it's too bad. Every book's God's in. I don't think it's going to happen though. But if it does, then that's on them.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think that people, it just in the way that it's the kind of argument that people make about people being bored in,
Mhm.
in hyper. How could you be bored with hyper reality and connectivity?
You get bored when you're sitting at the doctor's office and you don't have anything to do and you don't want to read the paper. Well, now you got a smartphone. People play on that instead. Boredom is something where you have no choice but to not do anything until you do something specific. I've never been bored, other than when I have to wait for like 5 minutes for something I'm waiting on. I don't know, the idea that you get bored with life. I have decades worth of books I promised to read that I have to get around to still. And
Precisely.
I'm pretty sure that more books will be written in that period of time than I have a chance to read. Um, I mean, it could happen. You live to be 1 trillion years old or as a super intelligence, you could get bored. Every book might just start, it's every book is different, but some of them just start getting kind of cliche after a while because so many themes are the same. That could happen to somebody. You get the wall bag or the infinitely prolonged from Douglas Adams' Life, the Universe, and Everything. He's seen every movie 3 million times, whatever it is, or he's seen things so close to it that doesn't make a difference. Yeah, I could see a person getting that bored, but if that's the case, they've got options. They could wipe their memory, they could reward hack themselves, or they could just decide to die. I don't like suicide, but I think when you're 1 billion years old, if you decide that's it, it's probably not that big of a deal anymore. If you want to do that, then I'm sure you take your time to think it through.
We were talking about Neuralace a little bit, and I think it has implications for. I'm very interested in the idea of the state of unconsciousness. We are able to, and I've been a lucid dreamer for some years, and we are able to have some kind make a point of having a memory of those things and being able to control those things. That adds an interesting layer to this. Neuralace might allow us to be having literal work products beyond just some memory or inkling of what had happened and some control of it. Literal work product in that context. It's a very exciting prospect for me.
I hate to say and it's different for everybody else. But hypnagogia for me is always one of those fun things I look forward to for that brief moment or two. And sometimes it will just startle you away because for me, it's that image of something. It was like, I don't even know where that came from. That's nothing I'm thinking about. I have to admit, though, that it's never really driven me to any great creative product. I know for some folks it has, by all means. If it does, it does. And certainly if it's one of those things that, people can train themselves to do, and I gather that you can. I've never had to practice those techniques myself because it seemed to happen to me naturally. And they all kind of awesome. If you can get something like that, then absolutely. Careful, obviously. It's like people use altered states of mind to enhance their writing or things like that. I'm never going to criticize somebody for trying to up their game productivity wise, as long as being reasonably cautious about what they do to it. But people can trick themselves in that a lot too. A lot of the things that do produce altered states of mind do not necessarily work as well or as people think they are. And I also add that I have never made use of those things consciously, and I have never had a problem or been accused of having problems doing outside the box thinking. So, to each his or its own, but I wouldn't want anyone to feel like it's a necessity to go those paths. At the same time, lucid dreaming is kind of cool. So,
It's just in the same vein of these super soldiers, or the Winston Churchill, maybe it wasn't Winston Churchill, that the sleep is the greatest of thieves. It was actually an earlier
the problem with any
philosopher.
Winston Churchill quote is you never know who he stole it from.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he stole that from an Enlightenment philosopher.
But Winston Churchill was always a safe one of that because he did so many quotes. Many of them his own, I'm sure. We don't want to waste too much time sleeping. We'd like to get something productive out of sleep, and sure, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's one of those things where people will try it out as the technology improves, and some people might say, "I'm never going to use that." Other folks might say, "I'm going to use it all the time," and we'll start seeing if there's those unintended side effects, good or bad. Sometimes you get really good or bad or both. From one of these new things. Coffee makes you much more conscious, but we don't always want to use too much of it because it makes it hard for you to sleep, makes you jittery, whatever it is, gives you a crash. And that's a pretty mild nootropic. Some of these other things might be that, I got a perfect memory now. I got a perfect memory. I can remember where I left my keys at, which is very important. And I never lose my keys. I never lose anything. I never lose an argument with someone about when was the last time I took the trash out, because I can say November 5th, 25th, 2:2 p.m. or whatever it is. You remember exactly that, and they do too. Those kind of things are not necessarily beneficial. You could get lost in your memories pretty easy if they're realistic enough. And then, of course, because of the way our brains are done, our memories are not recordings. And if you're going back and reliving them, they're not recorded anymore. They're going to change. So you're not just going back and living your memories, you're living the what ifs. And you start having those virtual reality options on there too, the really good simulations. You're going back and actually experiencing those what ifs. But you don't necessarily need virtual reality if your mind's that augmented, because you can just do it in your own head. And that might be something people tend to do a lot. You have the super intelligence variety, the speed intelligence, where you can just think much faster. You might have people who fall asleep each night for an hour and experience an extra year. How different are they when they wake up? These are not necessarily bad things. They have dangers to them, though, that benefits. And so there's a new challenges.
Yeah, it could very well lead to sort of a navel gazing to the extreme. People, and that is a danger for lucid dreamers. It's also a danger for lucid dreamers. Before they'd done it. And then if they were able to look at the experiences that they had, they might see that as a horror show, and they're maybe engaging in these narratives and intrigues in their lucid dreaming set of scripts and experiences that they would not have desired prior to doing that in their waking life at all. If you add an element of that where you then have neuralace, you have these, right now it's 10,000 big cloning neurons, base 10,000 neurons, where you have the ability to make some impact on the real world with what might be just utter madness.
It's danger is if the mind can, if anything you imagine can come into existence, which is, with a lot of these virtual reality things is exactly the problem. Is it anything you imagine? Is it just your conscious mind, or is it your subconscious? You just imagine it as something, the boogeyman is chasing you. And that's a real big problem with a lot of the full immersion VR. And we're not talking about just putting on glasses or getting something shoved in your skull. Big enough enhancements, you don't have anything shoved in your skull. You're just carrying a supercomputer around that does this stuff for you, that maybe wires some other things for objects and interaction. You are going to see one of the first things people invent to go along with this is something that either suppresses your recognition that you're in a simulation or kind of creates a false narrative so that you believe that this is real. Not because you're trying to trick people, although you might use it for that kind of thing, rather because people have voluntarily said, well, look, while I'm in the Westeros simulation up on the wall fighting off the, it's only been off the air for a few months, so I forgot what they're called, the icy dudes. Uh, I don't want to remember that I work at Starbucks. I don't want to
Yeah.
remember that my wife's going to nag me when I get home, or that I've forgotten to take my kid to a sports game. I want to be fully in this experience. By the way, it does not necessarily mean that you have to erase their memory. When you're dreaming, it's like your memory has gone away. You believe you're in that simulation. You just have to suppress the desire to think about it a little bit.
Mm,
Obviously, there's a method for that because we use it in dreaming. Um, People aren't going to want to remember doing that. So it's a really good way to get lost in your navel gazing. You don't even remember that you're in one of these simulations. And, it's going to blow all those little things that tell you that you're in the matrix because you voluntarily don't want to think about them. To
mm,
say, how do you know you're in a simulation, a really good simulation? You can't ever forcibly find your way out of one of these things because whoever's running a thing has the ability to stop it. It's not a brain of that, right? To stop it and rewrite the little thing in your head that says, oh, look, I noticed that was wrong. No, I didn't. you
mm,
know? Or, oh,
yeah.
that's just me being crazy, You're going to have these
Mm,
voluntarily, potentially. So people might not even realize they're in one of these simulations because they specifically asked not to. But of
mm,
course, not idiots, so we'd have a withdraw clause. We would have the safe word, safe event, time, or whatever it is that would pull people out of these things. And you might
mm,
actually get interesting laws that said you had to emerge after every 100 subjective years, which
mm.
might take a minute, might take a year, might take 1,000 years of real time. But those are the kind of bizarre regulations that you'll start having pop up on stuff like this, which again, fortunately, is for another generation to worry about.
It's interesting, and just in the way that I said that I don't, I think of the personal assistant kind of model. People who are becoming this immersed in an indulgent kind of lifestyle. They probably, they also maybe have the capacity to be running more productive subroutines. If they're able to, basically still be managing their lives and work product or other necessaries. As a head up device, you're fighting ice guys, but you have a head up device that's telling you that you're actually also at the same time the virtual Ben is doing the important work that he should be doing, and you're able to do the fun stuff that you want to
And
be
so long as the virtual Ben isn't a real person in terms of real full consciousness, all as well. Of course,
doing.
that's
Yeah,
the you might have to have that kind of semi-hive mind where it's virtual Ben's turn to be in the simulation. You got to go do the work. That's just
I
grand.
think that I think that semi-hive mind is going to be Web 4.0.
Yeah.
I think that that is going to be a kind of experience that people are going to be experiencing in 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, but it's no
Um,
different in many ways than a helpful appliance. It's I don't have to actually go out and to make my own toast. I have a toaster that does that. But then again, I didn't grow that grain either. Uh, I don't need to necessarily consciously edit a document as a writer. I'm not gaining anything from that. My mind's already got the ability to do that. So a copy of me going and doing that's just fine. But um, I want to make sure that that copy is not really a person experiencing this unpleasantness all the time. And I also want to make sure I'm gaining the experience from that too. I want that knowledge. So that ability to kind of mix in multiple timelines into something cohesive, that is going to be one of those big aspects of neural augmentation that's going to have to be dealt with. How do I add in the experiences? How to keep my dreams separate from my realities? How do I keep my side ventures where I spent the day off in Mount Everest while I was also sitting at my desk working? How do I integrate all that into a stable, cohesive, integrated individual? That's not insane.
I think that this time that we've spent talking about advanced algorithms and prospects for metaverse concepts, to my mind, been time well spent. I thank you again, Isaac Arthur, for sitting down with me in telepresence form and and doing this. I've had a lot of fun. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon.
Oh, I'd love to. Thanks for having me on, Ben.